Codex Infinitum, Prologue. It was finally over. Asvaldur would now be trapped for all time. Ceridian was sure of it. Trapped, but not dead. But that would have to be good enough. Ceridian looked up at the newly created range of mountains that spanned the northern horizon, the entire northern horizon. From the farthest east to the farthest west, this new wall of stone would stand guard, ensuring that Asvaldur would never return. It was bigger than he expected. Curving out and away from him, the further it rose into the sky, like a giant half-cylinder laid on its side. The massive amount of dust churned up from creating these mountains was now beginning to settle, turning all the ice and snow around them into a gray sludge. A small price to pay for saving the world. "That was close," said Nimit. "For a moment I thought they were actually going to escape." Ceridian dared not make eye contact with her. She was one of the first three, and he was only a second nine. He owed her his freedom and his life. She owed him nothing. But even as a glance, she was a beautiful contradiction. Young yet ancient, willowy yet strong, smiling yet deadly serious. Not to mention her raven black hair, black eyes, and black lips, contrasting starkly with her pale alabaster skin. Her ebony plate armor was thin and wispy, but was made of the finest doomstrill. She looked every bit the queen she wasn't. He, on the other hand, was more straightforward. Nothing too complex or complicated. No armor, a good watertight cloak, dark green, a wide-brimmed hat, reliable worn-in boots, and some even more reliable throwing knives. Nimit looked over at him and gasped. "Your eye," she said. "Oh," he mumbled as he brought a hand to his left eye. It was completely gone. Only a bloody socket remained. "I thought it was odd I couldn't see out of it," Ceridian laughed. "It must have popped out when I was trying to pin old Val to the ground. He wasn't too happy about it, and shot off a few words in my direction. One must have hit." "You could heal it, you know," she said matter-of-factly. "Nah," he said with a wave of his hand. "I've always wanted a battle scar. Besides, maybe having a hole in my skull will come in handy some day." He didn't look right at her, but Ceridian imagined her looking confused, and he smiled at the thought. "Old Val?" she finally asked. "That's what I call Asvaldur," he muttered. "Quicker that way. Easier. Not as many syllables to track." "Asvaldur," he said, rolling the R at the end for emphasis. "Then should I call you Dean?" she giggled. Her laugh was as light as chimes in the wind. Ceridian made a mock show of disgust at the name. She giggled again. "What about Sir?" she asked. He beamed. She smiled back. "Sir it is." Silence. Glorious silence after a well-planned day that went nothing like they had expected. More chaos than order. But now they could rest. They both just stared up at the new wall. The North Line. That's what it would be called. And no one would ever be allowed to cross it again. For ages hence, generations would remember what they did here, what horrible evil they had locked away to keep the world safe. And it was finally over. A horse and rider came up behind them. Sir and Nimit spun around in surprise, still jumpy from the battle. A tall, lanky man dressed all in black rode up, his face and hair and clothing all covered with dust. He must have barely escaped. "Dristan!" shouted Sir with glee. "You old mop-bucket! You made it, and just in the nick of time. You and—" And that's when he noticed. So did Nimit. "Where's Phexy?" she asked, looking behind the horse as if Phexy would be there. "Where is my sister, Dristan?" Dristan leapt down from his horse and embraced Nimit, something a second nine should never do to a first three. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry." "Out with the man," said Sir as he grabbed Dristan away from Nimit. "What happened?" "We were just leaving and—" he began but trailed off into silence, just staring at the ground in front of him. "And?" shouted Sir. "And what?" "And she jumped. She jumped off the horse. She knew something had gone wrong with the plan and she ran back to fix it. I got off the horse to go down after her, but I couldn't find her down there. I thought maybe she found her way back on her own. Maybe I'd see her on this side of the mountains. But I can't find her. I rode up and down the line again and again and again, but there's no sign of her. I'm afraid she—" He trailed off and fell silent. An icy blast of wind was the only sound for a few moments. All three of them knew what this meant. "Then she is lost to us," said Nimit, saying what the others would not. A tear formed and froze next to her eye. "She is lost forever." "But not in vain," said Sir, trying to comfort her. "Her sacrifice also trapped Asvaldur. She's a hero." Dristan sat on the ice and just kept shaking his head. "I'm so sorry," he kept mumbling. Nimit stared back at the mountains where her sister was left behind. It was almost like she was watching, waiting for her sister to reappear on this side. Sir watched her grieve, wishing there was something he could do to bring Phexy back. Then with a jerk of her hand, Nimit pointed at the base of the mountains and said, "What's that?" "Where?" asked Sir, looking in the same direction, scanning the line where stone met ice at the base of the mountains. "There," she pointed, "that dark figure against the snow." Dristan stood up. Could it be, he hoped, squinting at the figure running across the ice? Maybe she made it after all. "It can't be," said Sir as he followed the figure's path with his one good eye. In a flash he dipped his knife into the snow and started to write a word onto the air with the melting water droplets. It was a crude word, not using a traditional quill and ink, but it would have to do. Immediately the air compressed, forming a telescopic lens for them to see the figure more closely. "It is," said Nimit. She began to weep openly, all decorum forgotten. Asvaldur had escaped.